You are listening to Robert Vane's podcast.
Meet Bianca Valencia Criscuolo. Raised in the quiet town of Easton, Connecticut, Bianca's journey carried her to the vibrant streets of Brooklyn, New York, where she studied illustration at Parsons School of Design. Awarded a scholarship from the Beijing Contemporary Arts Foundation, she expanded her studies into Mandarin Chinese and East Asian art, laying the foundation for a global perspective on creativity. Her passion for the fine art world grew as she curated with the Contemporary Art Modern Project Galleries, working major events like Volta, Hamptons Art Fair, and Art Basel New York. By 25, she debuted her first solo exhibition, Beyond the Veil, exploring the tensions between, and became a leader in her local artist guild, as well as a key member of Manhattan's Call Together, a collective dedicated to cultivating flourishing artists and bringing public art to all. Bianca's collaborations span names like Makoto Fujimura, Clara Fialho, Guanyu Zhang, and Esther Moon. Yet her vision reaches beyond the canvas. After earning her BFA from Parsons, she shifted her focus to bridging the divine and the physical, pursuing truth, beauty, and hope, even in the midst of darkness. Her advocacy with Embers International in India and her training with the International Arts Movement's Academy Kintsugi deepened her commitment to the philosophy of beauty in brokenness. Today, Bianca works from her studio at the Knowlton in Bridgeport, Connecticut, surrounded by a thriving creative community. She travels nationally, speaking on the healing power of creativity and the importance of art beyond the self. This is Bianca's story. So, hi Bianca, welcome to Robert's podcast. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you for having me.
I have a lot of questions for you. And the first one comes from looking at your work. We discussed it earlier in other contexts. So my first question would be about the media that you use. You work across oils, pen and ink, mixed media sometimes. How do you decide actually which medium you want to use?
That's a fantastic question. A lot of the choices can be semi-intuitive. However, I think my bodies of exploration have isolated themselves to particular medias. And I say that as in my dream works, anything that is exploring my dreams or meditative on dreams has found itself very tied to the visual language of pen and ink, black and white. I find it to be the easiest way to contemplate, meditate on, and think about my dreams. And when it comes to my theological, philosophical, or any other explorations I do, it's the oils and the mixed media. Nowadays, I think my oils are the primary base, and the mixed media kind of finds its language in that at some point in time. It's never solidly one or the other. But in general, I think they separate between intentionally meditating on a dream, pen and ink, and then my paintings being echoes of my process when I think about theology, philosophy, and what I'm working through in my regular day-to-day thoughts.
You mentioned that you sometimes draw upon your own dreams, or at least dreamlike material. Now, how does it actually work? How do you come from a particular dream to a finished piece?
Oh, that's interesting because my dream illustration works, it's rare that I actually ever consider them finished pieces. Actually, I have a few examples here that I can show they're just records of my dreams. I see them almost as just visual journals in some way. So it can be done in the way that a journal is finished when the piece is full. And I think it's better to explain with a bit of a visual. So I have with me 3 months worth of dreams. I'm going to show you here. Where it begins is I usually start at one side and then just slowly over the course of a few months, you can see where a dream shifts from the white bits to the dark black. I think there's a bit of usually transition mentally when I'm meditating on them. I just, without meaning to, have divided them up. And you can feel that the energy shifts a little bit between each of them. Like here, it's a little bit more intense energy. Some of the ones in the beginning are a little bit calmer. And you can tell that's kind of where the energy of the dream is. Some of them have obvious iconography in them or imagery or what have you. See, here's a few here that have a figure that was a reoccurring figure in several dreams. And though rarely this one is unfinished, as you can see, there's space for another dream to be thought about. Though I rarely draw like the actual things in the dream, this is always my process on meditating on the dream. And so most of my work, even my large scale paintings, are accompanied by some form of writing. Because I found that writing can be the most literal. And when it comes to how I like to think or meditate on stuff, having too much of a confined space in terms of writing doesn't do me justice. But I still want to have the exact thing sometimes down to reference. I'm a bit of I like to record things exactly type of a person, but I can't seem to really bring that over into the actual painting or illustration space. They remain separate.
So are you saying that the dream is more like an inspiration to start a process of painting? It's not about recreating the dream or the dream image.
Yeah, something like that. It's an inspiration, but the painting, it's like the illustration period, because I confine the dream stuff as much as possible to illustrating. The illustration itself feels like the remnants of my meditation time. Like if I've woken up from a dream and I have it and it sticks with me after I've already written a little bit of it down, I feel the need to meditate on it or pray on it, or however individual people consider that time of thinking about something. And I like to have a chunked out time to really explore that. It might even be over the course of several days. That's where the illustration comes into play, where it's my actual time dedicated to considering, thinking about, working through. And so the pieces, that's why they're non-narrative. There's no imagery in them that's distinct usually, is because that is the echoes almost of my mind working through something. That is the space that I can do it in. I can't seem to focus just sitting and contemplating on my own. I need a mechanism to kind of subvert my conscious thought in some way, if that makes sense.
So now you're talking also about the procedure. What is it really like? I mean, the whole concept of going from a dream to some kind of finished work seems to suggest two things, both an intuitive exploration, you talked about meditating on the content of your dreams, or is it really a deliberate construction? Is it something that, let's say, has also a source in your intellectual survey, your intellectual understanding of the content of the dream?
It's interesting because I actually don't know if I can say any of my work is one or the other. And I know that's almost like a very political fence lining way to approach that question. But if I think about it, like, here's a good example. I'll switch to paintings to explain it. But sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll just have an image of a painting that comes to me. Whether or not I know what it's exploring is usually a toss up in the air. I never know, but I'll have an image of something. And other times, like, I have a thought about, let's say, the concept of absolute truth, and I want to work through it, and I begin a painting to think about it. So there's very different ways that the process can begin with them, and I can't say one is necessarily structured specifically, and one is just the process of working through something.
But you use a very interesting phrase.
Yeah.
I made a painting in order to think about it.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean, is that a bit how it works? That, let's say, the intuitive part that leads to the painting, to the image, is also a starting point for a reflection on it.
Yes, I would say the dominant body of work that I have has been because I needed to think about something. I had to paint to work through my thoughts. I've told people before in interviews that sometimes I feel illiterate without a pen, pencil, or even paintbrush, because it's just my thoughts don't often move too quickly for me to capture with words, and sometimes move too quickly for me to really even speak about or work through conversation. A lot of times before I can even get to that phase of ideas or thoughts about bigger truths, I have to first paint. Otherwise, they're a jumbled mess, and I feel like I'm presenting somebody a heaping ball of yarn there's no the threads, you don't know where it begins or ends. They're just kind of all these thoughts jumbled, whereas the painting is that time of knitting where I can kind of begin to form them into something cohesive, if that makes sense.
It does, and I remember that in the past we've talked about the possibility of describing your art as, let's say, telling a story or explaining an idea in a particular imaginative language. There's a language element, which also is enforced, of course, by the many poems that you have used besides the imaging. And you seem to affirm that now by saying, well, from the dream image, from the meditative process, I come to something that is really an expression of all of that in the kind of language that allows you to speak very quickly and
Yes.
to catch the idea just the way it appears to you.
Exactly. That's a wonderful way to put it. Yeah.
Let's move to another point. You mentioned it once already. There is a definite Christian background in your work. There are works that they even bear titles or refer to Christian symbols and Christian ideas. How would you summarize the role of your Christian faith in both the images that you use and the themes that you talk about, but also the process of creating a work of art?
I don't think I personally can separate them in any way. It's funny, for a long time, I thought I did. I spent a good part of my early years before pursuing visual arts full time, considering myself a Christian and an artist, and or somebody who's spiritual and an artist, and I found my visual language at that time was actually very weak. I couldn't understand why I felt that the pieces were so obviously trying to say something and didn't invite anything. And I found myself repelled by my own work because of that. When I began to weave the two together and realize that as an image-bearing creature, and as we first meet God in Scripture, he is a maker, that if that's his first image he presents to us, how ingrained it had to be in me specifically as an artist to pay attention to that type of language and that stuff that was happening in scripture work in my personal work. And I realized that a large part of what I personally feel inspires my work is this through line of wanting to see almost a rebirth of the sublime in the art world. We have this introspective, beautiful, which in its own right, in some ways, introspective reflection in a lot of people's artwork that reaches for personal narrative that is interesting. But I feel like it's gone too far almost. And there's this lack of universal truth or reaching for something greater than the self in the contemporary art world. And when I began to explore what it would look like to make work that sought something external and made you feel both small and important in some way, I realized that the work could feel complete to me in some way. And I could present it and it felt like other people were receiving it exactly how I had hoped and imagined. So when I switched over to doing that type of work and seeing whether it was exploring, I have a series exploring the origins of the universe in Genesis and what it means to encounter this creator and this chaos water, or this beginning of time, and how we would receive and portray that as an artist. Or my series that is very personal in some ways, where it's called The Muses, and it's my individual experience of people and how I paint them and portray them. But how do I do it in a way that keeps them be held and loved in the same way that the creator would have? I don't want them to become idols. I want them to stay as a muse, but where does that line shift? So it suddenly became like I could see all of my work most clearly through that lens. It made sense to me finally that if I could reach for greater absolute truths in some way, or truths, and I was already reaching for the creator, since it's the only truth that exists. If that makes sense. I hope
it makes sense to me. It's not let's say a simple idea.
No.
But you're making a connection between let's say the absolute creator, God's creativity, and the creativity of human beings. You exemplify, of course, that human creativity. I remember you saying at one stage that art is humanity's default state of being. Does it have anything to do with your previous answer? Are we going in that direction, that, let's say, the creator imbued in us, gave us this innate desire to create ourselves, that art is maybe like a response to his creativity?
I genuinely think so. I'm part of this organization called Call to Gather, it's about maybe 20 artists, dominantly of Christian background of some kind, but we include as many artists as possible. And when we use the word artist, we actually categorize it across many disciplines. Like we have chefs, photographers, painters, sculptors, people who do calligraphy, and that's their
There's quite a range of creative arts, yeah.
And we call them artists because we see that as them image bearing the art that the Lord makes in this beautiful world. And it feels important to us because part of that organization's goal is to make it accessible to the public, to have these people who are true practitioners of some kind, artisans, makers, and allowing people access to that, because we live in a culture where it's quite rare for people to see the product of their hands anymore in their work. And I think when I think of an artist, I think actually dominantly of a maker who sees the product of their hands in some capacity made before them. I don't necessarily see it just as a painter. I know there's big A artists and little a artists, but I still feel like it's important because human beings, to me, what makes them quite unique from other species is this creation ability, or this desire to make, because it bears the same image, as I said before, as like when we first meet God in scripture. Because if that's how he introduces himself, I imagine that there's something fundamentally important to how humanity must relate to that in some way. So for me, that when I say that as it's the innate nature of man, or the way that we ought to be, and kind of our baseline, I think that's how I mean it in the most like inclusive sense of that word.
Okay. There's one element that I want to explore a little bit further, maybe by looking at one of your paintings. And talk about that together, so I can see if I will try to get it on the screen now. Does it work? Yeah, okay, there we have it. I think this is the first painting I ever saw by your hand. And of course, I was fascinated by it. Look at this, the title, Elohim, Inevitable Redemption. And then somehow you think that you might see something that resembles your own visual ideas about these words. Elohim, the name of God in the Old Testament as the creator and judge of the world. Redemption, an important word, of course, in Christian theology. And then you take a look at this, and at first that was a complete mystery to me. And then also here, the Requiem, and I remember you telling me that it was intentionally misspelled. So in order to well, that's one of my questions to you in order to achieve one. But this was a fascinating piece of work by you. Can you give me a little explanation of this painting of the image, first of all? Why is it called redemption, and why is it called inevitable redemption?
Sorry, pause on that.
Or can I ask you, why is it called redemption, and certainly why is it called inevitable redemption?
Absolutely. So part of the reason why this piece is one of the first ones that you've seen is it is a mirror of my personal redemptive story in some capacity. I didn't paint for about 4 years through college and focused primarily on illustration because when I came to faith, it was my understanding through my whole life as a painter from a very young age that I had to be depressed to paint in some capacity, and I had to encounter this darkness. And I did not want that to be part of my walk. I was a very young, joyful but naive Christian in some capacity. So I was like, I must reject all of that. I can't have that. It cannot be part of my work, because I was also not yet well read in scripture either. Did not understand how it could participate in my work. And it's funny because before I understood things, that was the title of this piece halfway through it. It was during COVID that this was made. Was in my 3rd year of college and had to return home from my wonderful life in the city that I was joyfully experiencing art school with many incredible artists and teachers. And suddenly I was returned to a space that I had considered dark for a very long time, returned to this confinement, and the world seemed without hope. And I painted this piece in the midst of a very depressed season, in which I thought I would never experience again because I had the Lord in my heart, or whatever my thoughts were at that point in time. And it's very dark. And you'll see in most of my work, there is a through line of this darkness. And I realized that there is no glorification of the redemptive act without seeing the darkness. It cannot truly be so wonderful without this being the reality. And I realized as I painted it that this was how I encountered Elohim, was like this inevitable redemption, this hope. It is not without that. Like, you can have the darkness, but it must have this hope. Otherwise, he did not make sense to me as a creator. At the same time that his glory doesn't feel fully understood without witnessing this darkness. And when it comes to the actual narrative behind this, there's a ton more, obviously, from that period of time. But that really stuck out to me when I chose the title of it. It was about halfway through the piece that the title came to me. And it really informed throughout the painting process how I felt about the piece. And this was far before I knew that my works would be exploring thoughts, or be like, before this I was painting traditional Rembrandt style portraiture and just very classical pieces, and hadn't really explored what it would mean to just experience painting in this way. And then, of course, poetry, which is really interesting. We've talked quite a bit about poetry in some of our conversations and how it plays into my works. So this piece was without a poem for a little while, until I realized that when I painted pieces like this, and they were some form of abstraction, didn't really have anywhere to ground, that I was offering the normal man an ocean with no ship to sail on. And I realized,
nice image. Yeah.
As an artist and as somebody who makes work, yes, for me, but also makes work to reach and try to explore a greater truth, that I had to give something that was an access point. And I didn't know how to do that for a long time. I would just write, like a curator would write a big written thing for it. But that felt like, I don't want to give you a cruise liner on the ocean, because I want you to experience the sea. I want you to experience the landscape of it. So instead, I found that I had an anthology of almost 200 published poems at this time, unpublished poems at this time, that had nowhere to go, that they were just pouring out of me regularly. And one day it just clicked that they could be married. And I say that very specifically because they're not one over the other, and they should be able to exist on their own in some way, but together you have now this bountiful offering as well as the ship to navigate it a little bit. I'm not telling you where to go, which direction necessarily to explore the piece, but there's something for you to sit in as you sit before it. And so when it came to Requiem, and it's funny because initially, actually, the spelling was incorrect, not on purpose. And I was going back and editing, and there's quite a few of my pieces nowadays that you'll see that there's spelling errors in them. And I leave them because I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also severely dyslexic, and I find it to be my brushstrokes in the language, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense.
Like if that is what it came out, and of course there are some things that I do correct just for the sake of clarity, but there are times when it feels like it causes pause in a way that a brushstroke might on a painting, and I like that. So it's not always obvious, but there are ones that sometimes, because I know they cause pause and questioning, I keep them.
I see.
So
well, we also talked a lot about the relationship between the image and the poem.
Yes.
Because whenever you look at it like this and you see them side by side, obviously you will try to use the image to understand the poem and the other way around.
Yes.
And we had a lengthy discussion about how is actually the redemption expressed in the image. It's pretty obvious that it is expressed as the possibility of hope, with the dictionary definitions that you give at the end of the Requiem. Its definitions include expect with confidence, to cherish a desire with anticipation. The last four lines. So redemption lies in hope, which is, by the way, a Pauline quotation. We are redeemed in hope, he says. Did you anticipate that by putting them side by side, there would be this effort, this hermeneutical effort, to try and understand the one through the other? And was that intentional to leave it like that?
Yes, I realized. So it's really interesting. I had well before I had painted this piece, actually, I was a curator for a while, and I did an exhibition called with artist Guangzhang Yu, who's one of my favorite artists, and it was called In the Space Between. And I liked this idea that it is between 2 points that a novel thought can occur because you pull this way and create a third point. It's not by just manifesting a point into existence. It's by having to pull on the thread and create a third point that something novel could occur. And when it came to wanting my artwork to be more of a dialogue with a person and not a statement upon them or a statement upon something, I realized I had to also offer this 2-point thread of some kind that they could pull on, whether it's closer to the poem and they pull this way, or that's closer to the painting and they pull this way, or they pick something directly in the middle, or it just gives them the raw materials to pull on something else. That's what I really wanted the pieces to do, is it's meant to be sat in front of and contemplated and had a conversation with in some way, like a person sitting before you.
That was so interesting when we discussed this idea by Emmanuel Levinas, that every work of art actually strives to be a dialogue. And that dialogue means that there is an exchange of possible interpretations, and that the work of art needs to be open to this diversity of interpretation. And by putting the poem next to it, you're actually inviting a second layer of interpretation. So the question, what does the poem say about the image, becomes a topic of very interesting and lengthy discussion, possibly between people, which is for Levinas exactly the function of a true work of art. While others will say, well, no, it's completely beyond language and human discourse, and it's merely the power of the image itself that wants to persuade you or wants to give you a specific experience. You actually chose for a method, a procedure that comes very close to Levinas' definition of good art. and I found that fascinating to discuss that with you. Going from the poem to the image, what is the redemptive element shown in the image? Am I right that it is in these 7 white lines?
Yeah. Hmm.
There it is, yeah? Like
Yes.
the manifestation of divine perfection?
Yeah, it's interesting because you and I have talked about it before with several of my pieces. There is this line work that is actually not common in my entire body of work, but it's always very intentional. And when I do a number in any capacity, it has an intentional meaning. Whether for the 7, and it's this completeness and this number that we just actually naturally associate with God in a large capacity. And through many studies and many different denominations, it still holds that weight. And I wanted that to be present. Like I have a piece that's also called Seventh Day that has 7 lines as well, but that it's about that day of rest. So that final line is thick, very thick and poignant. So when I do use that visual language, it's very intentional. It's rare, but it's poignant. And for this piece, when I was painting it, it was the lines were the final piece.
The final elements.
Yeah.
I see.
They were the final thing added, and it was interesting for me to experience that. While I already knew the piece would be titled Inevitable Redemption, but all I could see was the dark roiling, almost cloud-like negativeness that has its own beauty to it, but like this darkness. But I knew those lines would be painted the entire time I painted it. That was as soon as I got halfway through and I felt the name be Inevitable Redemption, those lines came to my mind. So even through the weeks of painting the dark cloud bits, that was always the ending in my head.
Can you also explain for me the white patch here on the left side? That's the only other thing that is really white in the painting. It seems to suggest a figure, but I'm not sure. Why is that? Why is it there? What is its function?
It's really funny because I remember you locking onto that bit when we first had the conversation about this piece, and my most earnest answer is I don't know why it came out, because there's actually no other white paint in this entire piece.
Yeah.
Even the lines are actually, they're gray enamel. They're done with a atomizer, so they're not. I never painted them by hand. Those, which I always find quite beautiful. Those lines were made with an atomizer where you blow into it and the paint hits the canvas. And I like lined up with strips of painter's tape to decide where they were.
Oh, that's how it works.
Yeah, I like the idea. A lot of my pieces actually have that process in them because I like the idea of breathing life into the piece that way.
Which you then literally do, yeah.
Yeah, like it's that ruach almost feeling of the breath being blown into it. And it was on those lines. But when I painted the piece, there was just this moment. I can't remember if anything specifically inspired it, but there was just this moment of white cream gesture that came out of when I was painting. And every time somebody looks at it, they say to me, they're like, I feel like it's me witnessing my soul in this space. Or like they attach themselves to it immediately. And so that's when it comes to when we talk about like how this maybe how we do things as a Christian. For me, that feels like spirit-led making. Like I didn't do that. It wasn't intentional. There was I didn't mean for that to be something someone could attach to, but every single time without fail, people do. So I assume that to be the hand of me just being a good vessel. If that makes sense.
But I surely understand someone who would think that this is me, this is the spectator looking at something. Because if you look at the poem again, then I would use the poem to understand the image. When it says in the 4th paragraph, I mourn the salient life lost. Well, who is doing that? It seems to me that in the image, it's this little white figure. If it is a figure on the left side. So even if it's maybe a mishap, just like the spelling of Requiem, it certainly has a function in
Mm-hmm.
the completed work. If it has anything to do with this
Yeah.
eye that is experiencing and looking at something that is in the poem.
Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think I need to say whether it does or doesn't, because I quite like that it's that someone will and someone else might not.
No, there's Levinas's idea of having a dialogue about it and
Yeah.
exchanging different points of view. It might evolve over time and change, but
Mm-hmm.
the image and the poem will give constantly cause for further introspection and meditation, and that's the strength of it, I believe. Um, the thing I ever saw of you was this, and I was really impressed with the powerful sadness that came from it,
Mm.
and the feeling of the opposite of redemption, actually. The inevitability, sure, but it certainly didn't look redemptive to me. And then I started to notice the 7 lines in the white figure and the concept of hope in the poem. And I remember saying to you, well, is this, let's say, essential to your work, that you don't want to um, talk about reality in an overly optimistic manner. You want to really show the darkness of life and the evil side of life, maybe. And you want to show that there is this ray of hope, this possibility of redemption, this other side of things. But you sure want to, you don't want to go into sort of romanticized concept of life or vision of life. So that it seemed to me, at least then, that most of your work, or the let's say the gravity of every painting that you have, seems to go with the darker side. You want to show the reality of it. Is that something that you recognize, and is it on purpose?
Yes, I think I lean away from like that what feels like to me like a very sentimental portrayal of life.
Uh-huh.
I understand that there is need for that in some capacity, because this can be too much for people to do all the time. But for me, when it comes to even, let's say, the books of scripture that I find myself most drawn towards, if I was to go down the list, it's Ezekiel, Ecclesiastes, Job, Romans. So, like, for me, there is this allure in the reality of this, because I know this is the human experience.
Why didn't you mention Lamentations?
Well, Lamentations as well, yeah. Well, I could go down a whole list if I wanted to put them in order. Revelation.
Okay.
But for me, it doesn't, like I said earlier, there is almost a lessening of the redemptive act without the acknowledgement of the darkness. And I think what makes artwork make somebody uncomfortable, it should make those who are comfortable feel disturbed, and those who are disturbed should feel comforted. And for me, this is the type of work that does that, because that person who lives life in pure optimism, to me, you lack perhaps a sensitivity to the world around you. Then you've created a bubble, because that can't be your full reality. But for the person who lives in the darkness, this is a candle in the light. It shows that it exists. And I like that ability to kind of sit in both worlds is something that appeals to me, which I know we've even talked about a bit, how that can feel like it's quite lonely at times, but at the same time, it feels like a necessity, especially in my generation's culture in the country that I live in, which is the US. It's very polarized. And I find that there is no desire for common ground language, but I feel like portraying such darkness attracts those who wouldn't want to be part of the conversation. And also, because the work speaks to this higher truth, attracts those who wouldn't have ever looked at the darkness. So I like that. That sits for me as work that I am proud of.
I was thinking a bit later, and after we had discussions about this painting, of the famous verse in John 1, and the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness did not, well, either comprehend it or grab it. That seems to be the motto of at least of this painting. So there is this darkness, and light shines into it, and the light is irresistible or inevitable, maybe, but it's not overwhelming. It's not driving away the darkness. It's still there. And I found that to be a very forceful statement of what you wanted to show. And you're quite right, I think, that without the experience of sin and darkness, redemption and light wouldn't mean a thing. It's also imperative to show what we are redeemed from, if we want to talk about redemption. Yeah. With your permission, I want to go to another subject.
Yes, absolutely.
My final two questions to you. How do you imagine yourself developing over the next, let's say 10 years?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because I like to think far ahead, but when it comes to the painting and the way that I work as an artist, it's very difficult for me to actually think about that. Because
would you be using the same procedure? Would you be using we talking and painting about the same themes, or is it possible that you go on a different route?
I think the themes will expand. I see it almost like, as an artist, the work that I do, I feel very akin sometimes to a research scientist, where I am in my little bubble of study, and then I have to figure out how to bring it to the world, because that's the point of my research. But ultimately, like, I just want this bubble to grow, and either whether it's I have a series that will follow me to the end of my life, and it's maybe, like, for me, origin series could be explored till the day I die. But there are new series that are constantly popping up, because they're things that I know I want to explore. And that's part of what when we talk about structured versus just going through the motions of doing something and having what comes out, is I do often build a framework of what I want to think about. For example, like, I have a new series, which we talked about very briefly, maybe last time, is called the Numenos. And it's very early stages of me thinking about, like, what is that encounter moment, in a way that for me still reflects that through line of the sublime. And I felt they're very closely related to each other, but I want to be more nuanced in that through the exploration of this body of work. So when it comes to new things, that's kind of what's on the horizon for me, other than just doing currently what I'm continuing to do. I'm also in the space of hopefully potentially going on to get my master's, which I think will in some ways potentially shift certain things that I think about.
That's a great part of your journey, of course.
Yeah, I want to be a lifelong learner. So I assume that I will always grow, but whether or not I know the direction of that, I can't really say right now.
Okay. Now, there's one question I wanted to ask you, but it's a bit of a frivolous question. So if you allow it, I will ask it. And you just talked about the bubble you live in. So, like, this little field of expertise that is expanding naturally. But you obviously also have contact with other artists. Now, is there one artist, dead or alive, that you really would like to cooperate with, that maybe you would be influenced by, or you would influence him or her? Is there someone that comes to mind then?
My instinct is, funnily enough, my mentor, which I've done a lot of study from him, and he's helped me a lot of ways in, like, as an artist in the art world, and how to orchestrate in that manner. But when it comes to maybe something collaborative, my mentor, his name is Makoto Fujimura. His work was seminal to my early, like, beginning to paint and explore things and consider how theology could incorporate into artwork. He's written some incredible books on the topic. And so I think I would be beyond overjoyed if I at some point could do something collaborative with him, since he's not only influenced my work a ton, but his writings have influenced mine. And I would like in some way maybe to do the same in return as a gift, as like peer to peer. I think that would be, yeah, I would be very joyed to do that.
Okay. Well, Bianca, thank you very much for this discussion, this talk. Thank you very much for this interview. I wish you all the best, and we'll meet soon again to discuss your work and your ideas about art, which I find very fascinating, I must say, and have now become part of my own journey. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much as well, Robert.
Okay.